your company is currently in the process of a takeover, maybe you're taking over another organization, or your company is being taken over, or you are merging with another organization, or you're going through some other kind of restructuring. Maybe everybody has been told that they've now got to be in the office 5 days a week or 4 days a week or whatever it be. I can't remember a time when I have spoken to so many individuals whose companies are going through major change. Some might call it transformation or restructuring. Obviously, my background is in transformation. I wanted to do this video specifically for you in terms of what is the role of networks in organisations that are going through a massive change, just because it just seems to be that's what everybody's experiencing at the moment. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to be talking about what is the role of networks, what is it that you can do to support individuals going through that change, how do you make sure that you conserve your energy as a network leader and don't burn out, so how do you sustain that energy, and everything else in between. So guys, this is ERG Strategy, the channel that gives you tips, tools, advice to help build and sustain engaged and effective, high impact employee networks that really make a difference and build thriving, engaged communities. So if that's what you're here for, new videos every Tuesday, and I go live every Friday on LinkedIn mainly, but obviously it also streams here to YouTube. And so this is what I'm talking about. Yeah, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had, and I've started to use more of the conversations to spot the trends that I see across organisations that are impacting networks. And I kid you not when I say, I speak to a lot of network leaders every week, and sometimes I actually get confused and I think, did I have that conversation with you already? I literally said this last week to somebody. She was describing a situation and I said, did we speak about this last week? But it was actually somebody else. But it's just that the issues that are coming up, there are several issues that just keep on coming up every time I have conversations. And organisations going through change probably is one of the biggest, actually. And it's not just with network leaders, it's with organisations more generally. And I guess that is because of the state of the economy, the stuff going on in the world. The world is like literally on fire, literally and metaphorically speaking on fire. In fact, this Friday's LinkedIn Live, I am speaking to somebody called Sarah Stein Lubrano about her book, Don't Talk About Politics, right? So that's a heads up if you're watching this and can check out the LinkedIn Live. But aside from that, think about AI and all of the disruption that that's making to the workplace. And basically, you have just got this recipe for major change, which actually didn't start in 2026. I would say that this actually started in 2020. Obviously, COVID started to drive some massive change in organisations, but then obviously then fueled by also things like technology and AI as well. So that's the landscape that a lot of networks are currently trying to navigate in. So, and this is something I've been brought into organisations to talk to or to run sessions on behalf of networks around change. And even currently when I'm running training and workshops, this comes up a lot because often the strategy of the organisation has shifted. So actually, what does that mean for networks? So I'm going to start off with something that came up in a training session I did last week, although in a slightly different guise, but it shows how versatile this tool is. And I usually call it the circle of control. Some people call it the sphere of influence, right? I call it the circle of control. So what I like to do, and this is something that you as networks can do, at least for your members, this maybe would make quite a nice Viva Engage thread, actually. And it's getting people to think about the circle of control. This is the tip that really tries to allay the sense of panic and the sense of the fear around the ambiguity and the uncertainty of the situation. So I don't know if you've seen this, but basically you have the circle of control, the circle of influence, and then the circle of concern. And it's usually drawn as 3 circles with the circle of control in the middle, then the circle of influence outside the circle of control, and then finally the circle of concern. If I had an editor, I would get them to do this for me, but I don't have an editor for various reasons, and I haven't got the skills yet to overlay those graphics onto this. Maybe AI will catch up right with that and will do it for me automatically. But that tool, if you were to Google one of the main uses of that tool, actually, it is in situations like this where you want to like lower stress levels, you want to lower those feelings of anxiety. So actually, I talked to an organisation about this. So this is how it could work as a Viva Engage post. You could sort of say, you know, we're going through X, Y, and Z, whatever it be, you know, a transaction, an acquisition, a merger, a restructuring, you know, a relocation, or changing the way of working, as in we're all being asked to come into the office. You could start a thread that sort of said, you know, we understand that people are going through challenging times. What currently sits in your circle of control, as in like, what are the things that you can control? And actually, by getting people to focus on what they can control, it helps to reduce or lower the levels of anxiety about the things that they can't control, right? So that's the first tool that I would get you to get members to think about. So I'm really talking to you now as leading a network and helping the network to be a useful place where people can go for support. So the first thing you do is you focus on what is the circle of control. You can then potentially get people to focus on the sphere of influence, actually. So when it comes to this change, what are the things that you can influence? And I tell you what, the conversations that I've had with network leaders who are going through this kind of change, it's really interesting to see the individuals that maybe recognize that there are things that they can influence. And especially, I would argue, if you're a network leader, you probably don't realize the level of influence that you do have, but actually just by having that role, you know, you have access, for example, to senior leaders. And that means actually you do probably have more influence than you realize. So, you know, the next step is thinking about sphere of influence. And so that's something you could potentially get network members to do. Now, the only thing I would be a little bit cautious here in terms of where some of the conversations go, especially if you are in the US, right? So in the US, in terms of the influence of networks, there are a lot more legalities around what networks that are identity-based can and can't do. So you have to tread really carefully. I would probably focus just more on the circle of control if you are US-based, or if you're a global network that has colleagues in the US. If you are in the UK, one of the things that I would be getting you to do in terms of sphere of influence, or the circle of influence in particular, I would be, and it gets onto my next one, I would be asking your organisation, and certainly working with your people teams or your employee relations team in particular, I would be asking whether equality impact assessments have been done. So if you're not aware of equality impact assessments, or EIAs, they are there to make sure that when major things like this, major change is happening, or a major decision is being taken, or a process is being changed, or you know, a policy is being changed, etc., an equality impact assessment should be done in an organisation to make sure that the impact is fair from an equality perspective, right? So I would be asking the organisation whether equality impact assessments have been done, are being done, and also whether the results of those are shareable. And what I think that will do, because I am conscious that sometimes organisations do these as tick boxes, which obviously they shouldn't be, or sometimes they don't get as much rigour. But actually, I think even just by asking that question, it's probably going to make people think more before they take some of these decisions, kind of like quite rashly, or a little bit slapdash about the decision making. So that's something that I think as a network you can be pushing for, right, within these change equality impact assessments, to make sure that when changes are being done, particularly if it means a loss of jobs, to make sure that the processes are fair. The other thing I would add to that as well, alongside an equality impact assessment, I know some organisations have started doing this, and this is something I mentioned in a training session last week, having roles that are independent that go into some of these conversations just to ask those sorts of questions. And they're sometimes called things like inclusion observers, or although actually their role isn't just to observe, their role is to challenge from the perspective of equality and inclusion. So inclusion observers, bias interrupters or bias disruptors, they're sometimes called as well in some organisations. So if your organisation doesn't have that, that's something that you can suggest again on the back of, have they done equality impact assessments? If they have done that, great. If they've got processes that are still running, can they have an independent person in there? And it doesn't have to be somebody from the network, because there is a certain skill set that's needed, right? But just to ask the question, have you thought about doing that? Right, so those are some of the things that you can do, especially within that circle of influence. I then want to talk about how do you support practically the members that are going through this change. So something really important about creating safe spaces, and I know this is networks' bag, right? This is the thing that networks in theory should be really good at. So providing safe spaces, whether that be listening circles. So listening circles, and maybe, if you can get some of those safe spaces run where you actually have senior leaders in as well, or you have the people and culture team. So a mix of safe spaces that maybe are closed at times but then are open, because you don't want it to just be, what you don't want to do is you don't want to just create a them and us, because that won't be productive. So how do you make it productive? You maybe have a mixture of where it's listening circles with the exec, but you're still creating a safe space for members and the wider community to come together. And you really want it to be positioned around the well-being, so the well-being of the members and the wider community. And the one thing I would say about those safe spaces as well, it works really well in person. And, I'm a big fan of face-to-face, right? We are humans. And in an AI-enabled world, humanity is our only differentiator, right? It's our USP. So I'm a big fan of getting people physically together. I think you will find that in times when people are feeling under stress, they're feeling anxious about the change, there is massive value in getting people together. However, I recognise that it's just not physically possible for some people. So thinking about how you can do it physically in terms of, do you have hubs maybe where you can rotate the safe spaces around different regions to make it easier for people to come together? But if you absolutely can't get people in the same room, how do you do that in a virtual way or online? To again create that same feeling of safety. And when you do it online, you can either do it so that again it's an online meeting all at one time, but I want to borrow a tip from Maceo Owens, and this was coming out off the back of COVID. One of the learnings about creating community in a virtual way is having asynchronous tasks. So asynchronous engagement, what does that look like? And so going back to what I was saying at the start, how do you have, for example, a weekly prompt or a weekly poll or a weekly question in, for example, your Viva Engage or your other online communities where people can go on at a time that works for them and comment, right? So that's a way of having some way of connecting, which means they don't physically all have to be online at the same time. So maybe, as a committee, do some brainstorming around what some of these asynchronous ways to connect might look like. The other thing I want to talk about, though, is how do you conserve your energy as an employee network leader? Because you might find that you've got a lot of people coming to you saying, my role has been put at risk, this isn't fair. And actually you might have people saying, that they've noticed that a lot of, X type of person has been put at risk and it's not fair. And, what do you do as a network leader? So there is something about how do you conserve your energy? There's a couple of things. The first thing that I want to say actually is if you can get some control over your own time, your diary, your calendar, make sure that you maybe block out time when it works for you, when your energy levels are best to respond to those kinds of needs. And the example that I'll use is in terms of recording these videos, right, I used to, so from the start of 2026, I said, right, I'm going to record these videos, these YouTube videos in the afternoon, specifically actually on a Monday afternoon, because Monday is my day that I typically take for planning, planning out the week, planning content, getting back to clients, doing any bits of paperwork, etc. Here's the thing. I am a morning person. I'm not really an afternoon person. I actually start to flag. My energy levels start to flag in the afternoon. And it was literally this weekend and this morning, and especially after recording the last video, which I'd recorded after a long day of travel in the afternoon. I'd gotten to a hotel, I'd recorded it. This was the first in this series of 3. And my energy levels were just so low. And I was like, I cannot record in the afternoon, have to record in the morning, because I am a morning person and I know that's when I've got most in the tank, right? So I would say the same to you as ERG network leads. Think about when your energy is best to be in that space to support, and actually maybe block out that time to deal with, for example, emails or content in Viva Engage, if you're actually going to be like going in and sort of like doing a temperature check of how people are feeling. So that's, you know, conserve your energy. Think about the time as to when you're even going to respond to some of these issues. But the one thing that I want to really focus on is signposting, right? Because you can't do this all yourself, and actually neither should you be doing it all yourself. As employee network leads, particularly if you're in a larger organization, there are other resources, departments, teams, and this is internally and externally, to support individuals going through various change. So part of your role actually as a network is to signpost rather than to be, you know, the therapist, the trade union, the line manager, the counsellor, you know, all of that. You got to be able to signpost, and actually it's a great opportunity to use the community. So use the network and the members to remind people of all of the resources. You know, I'm hoping that you've got a good employee assistance program that can support people through this. If you haven't, that is one that's for a conversation with the people team. The people team own that relationship, particularly probably the head of benefits. They own that relationship. So if the EAP is not very good, that's for a conversation with them in terms of how do we get a better EAP. If you're going through major change, for example, that is resulting in loss of roles or redundancies, then the chances are that you've got a specific support or a specific outplacement support that's been arranged by your organisation. So again, how can you signpost individuals into that support? And even within the organisation, there may be other areas of support as well. So signposting, don't think that you've got to sort of take all of this on, you know, you and all committee members, really important. The other thing I want to talk about, and this goes back to influence and what you as a network leader can or can't influence. I think you'd be surprised how much influence you have. Now, I'm not going to say that, you know, if your organisation is up for sale, that you can stop the transaction going through, right? That's probably unrealistic. That's probably not going to happen. But I think there's something about if you have got access to the C-suite, particularly the C-suite of, if you're, for example, in a merger situation and you're merging with an organisation that actually is bigger, and it's starting to be quite clear that their exec, as in like the other firm's exec, are going to take the bulk of the key roles. You know, maybe they are taking the CEO role and maybe your CFO is staying, right? There's all kinds of ways that you can figure out where the power is shifting to, right? What I would say is there's something about, and this is where, you know, as a network lead, you got to really now start to rely on your skills of building relationships and stakeholder management, which is something I've talked about in another video. So maybe go and check that one out in terms of the key skills of a leader, because being able to now network strategically is absolutely critical. I spoke to somebody recently whose company is going through a transaction. In fact, no, I've spoken to a couple of people, in fact, more than a couple, whose organisations are going through transactions. And what I sense from them as network leads is that they are being incredibly cautious and almost are thinking to themselves, I'm just going to I'm just going to maybe not say or do anything, or actually almost like worse, actually, as a network, we're just going to pause everything that we're doing and we're just going to sit and wait. Well, you can do that, and that is a strategy, but that is not how you influence. Actually, what you should be doing is, and I know this maybe sounds a little bit scary, but if, for example, you've had an introduction to new members of the C-suite, or actually, I would say don't even wait until you've had an introduction, because, what's the worst that can happen, right? I would say you should be actively seeking out those key stakeholders in the new organisation, and you should be introducing yourself. You should be... So here's what I would say first. You want to be doing some listening, and I'm going to be talking about this in my next video. You want to be listening. You want to be listening for the signals of what is important to those new stakeholders. So listen to the speeches that have been given about the new change that's happening in your business. Listen to what is important to the new CEO that's taking the organisation forward. So whatever it be about, listen for the cues and the signals. I guarantee if you listen to what they say, you will get clues as to what is important to them. And then what you need to do is you need to think about what it is that you are doing as an employee network that links or aligns to this future that they are now describing. And basically then when you speak to them, and you must speak to them, whether that means that you literally find out where they're going to be and you make sure that you are in that location, and you grab them when they go to the coffee machine, or you introduce them when you introduce yourself when you see them walking along in the corridor. When you give that introduction, have I done a video about pitch? I can't remember whether I've done a video about pitch. Maybe I need to do that video. But when you introduce yourself to them, you need to make sure that when you describe what it is that the network does and why the network is important to the organisation, you link it to the future world that they have described, right? So if, for example, I'm going to be talking about this in the next video, if you've got a new CEO that's come in and has started talking about the importance of having a great culture, right? Because I'm hearing this a lot. Culture all of a sudden has become the word that a lot of CEOs are talking about. Then when you find them, you introduce yourself to them, you're like, hi, I'm Cheryl. I look after the women's network, and we've been doing quite a lot of work around culture in these ways, or this is the way that we have been focusing on culture within our network, and specifically, actually, this is the way that we've been thinking about culture and how we make it work for our customers and or our clients. And so, if you introduce yourself to that CEO or the new exec team, and they hear that you understand how your network links to the future strategy and direction, I guarantee you will make an impression, and it will be a positive impression on that individual. And it hopefully sets your network actually up for some success going forwards and to have more visibility. I would absolutely encourage you to be doing that rather than to just be like sitting back and kind of waiting to see whether somebody's going to say, oh yeah, such and such a network, you can carry on with what you're doing. Don't go into this as, and I'm talking specifically now to employee network leaders, do not go into this from a position of fear, from a position of, we don't know what's going to happen. So actually, we're just going to do nothing and we're going to wait. Don't do that, because if the CEO or the new exec come in and they hear that there are these networks, but then they're not sure what they're doing, or they're going to hear it all from, a third party, potentially not individuals that are your allies, you're potentially setting yourself up for failure before you've even started, before the new team or the new power base has even heard about what you're doing. So my advice would be, don't wait, be strategic, do some listening to what the future goals, objectives are of the organization, and then do your kind of like your campaigning, your stakeholder management, basically. And then my final thing really is just maintaining that connection and that community. It's really important maintaining those bonds, just so that people feel safe and that they feel seen and that they feel heard. And hopefully, if you're managing the bit at the top in terms of the influencing at the top levels, and then you're managing that sense of connection and community, hopefully that is the way that you start to lead the community that you've got of members, but also the wider community in your organisation. You potentially become a little bit of a beacon, actually, a beacon of hope for your community that other colleagues see and potentially want to get involved in. Maybe for individuals that never have been involved with the network, they see actually that you've created a safe space. They see that members that are involved in the network seem to have like lower stress levels or are managing to get through the change, and they're kind of okay rather than in panic mode. So that's it. For anybody that is going through quite stressful situations, either drop me a DM or get in touch, or share your experiences in the comments. Share what's worked for you in the comments. Maybe share one thing that's worked, particularly around, for example, those ways of managing and creating community in your organisation. That's it. This is the second part of 3 videos of just things that are coming up a lot. The third video that I'm going to be doing, which is the next video, is going to be where I'm talking about culture and how it just seems like literally everywhere that I turn, people are talking about culture. So that's going to be next week's video. As I said, this Friday, the LinkedIn Live is going to be Don't Talk About Politics, which I know is not an easy one. So thank you all for watching. If this was useful, please share it with your committee members maybe, or even with some of your network champions that are kind of like helping to create this sense of community through what are, I understand, to be some really tough times at the moment. So please take care, look after yourselves and go with grace. See you next time.